It's Chris here again from Avennia, and here joining me again is Eli Traverse. He's our Northwest sales manager and also a somm in his own right, so it's always great to have him here talking about our wines. In this case, our new release coming up in a couple weeks, the Cabernet Franc, Shampoo Vineyard, and the Gravura. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We thought this was a good opportunity to talk a little bit more about a grape that I don't think gets enough love, which is Cabernet Franc. This release is a little different than our past holiday releases in that we still have the Gravura, but the Cab Franc is new in this slot. So we're really excited to get a lot of you to try this wine that might not have tried it. So before that, though, I'll basically walk you through a little history of the grape, where it was from, where it's grown all over the world, and then we'll get into tasting some wines.
Sounds great.
Great. While some debate the origins of Cabernet Franc, it is assumed that this Vitis vinifera variety hails from the western Pyrenees Mountains in southwest France and northern Spain, in what is now known as the Basque region. Its parentage is unknown, but it has been genetically linked to Ondarribia-Belza, the main red grape of Chacoli on Spain's northern border. From southwest France, the grape eventually spread north to Bordeaux, where it grows today and is a prominent component of red blends from the area, particularly on the right bank in Saint-Emilion, where it is known as Boucher. Here, Cab Franc is used as a tart and fresh blending partner to the more widely planted Merlot. Thanks to Cardinal Richelieu in the 17th century, cuttings of Cabernet Franc were brought further north to an abbey in Bourgogne in the Loire River Valley. Here, the abbot Breton planted and tended the vines and helped them spread throughout the valley. Breton, as the grape is known there today, is the most planted red grape in the region, with Bourgogne and Chinon leading the way. In addition to Bordeaux and the Loire Valley, Cab Franc is also produced in parts of Dordogne, southwest France, and the Languedoc, specifically Malpère, where by law it makes up 50% of the blend alongside Merlot. Outside of France, Cab Franc is planted in the Veneto and Friuli regions of Italy, as well as the Bulgari subregion of Tuscany, where it is used in some world-famous Super Tuscan wines modeled after the blends of Bordeaux. It is also planted in the Villani area of Hungary and throughout several regions of Spain. Wine regions in the New World have also seen an increase in Cab Franc plantings over the last few decades, especially in areas that make similar Bordeaux-style blends like Margaret River Valley in Australia, Stellenbosch in South Africa, Mendoza in Argentina, Maipo Valley in Chile, and of course, all throughout California and Washington in the US. Canada also sees a plethora of Cab Franc plantings, as the grape variety is fairly cold-hardy and can handle the extreme winters better than other Vitis vinifera vines. It is especially unique in the rare and highly sought-after ice wines of Enniskillen in Ontario. So whether shining on its own or lending a spice and seasoning to world-class blends, Cabernet Franc is a force to be reckoned with and is absolutely worth seeking out.
So first of all, we're going to start by tasting these wines separately, just the Cabernet Franc element itself, because I think it's really interesting that Cabernet Franc in many parts of the world, like Bordeaux for instance, it's a blending variety. And then in other parts of the world, like the Loire Valley and other areas, it can be the focus or even 100% of the blend. And that's what these two wines are kind of doing. So we're going to start, Eli, by trying this Bacchus Cabernet Franc.
Awesome. So we get Cabernet Franc from a couple different spots, but these are basically the two big ones, right?
These are the two main ones, and in this case, the Bacchus is the only Cabernet Franc in the Gravura, and the Shampoo obviously is 100% of the Shampoo. And I think it'll just start to show why we decide sometimes to blend it and why sometimes it can stand on its own.
Awesome. So tell me, before we go into how everything tastes, tell me a little bit about Bacchus Vineyard. Where are we talking about in Washington?
Yeah, Bacchus lies about 15 miles north of Pasco. So if you think of the Yakima Valley, it's about 15 miles northeast of that. So it's considered the Columbia Valley. But it's planted in the early 70s.
Wow.
And after that big freeze in '96, they had a chance to replant a lot of their vines, and it gave them a chance to try new varieties that I think were just gaining popularity. And one of those is Cabernet Franc. In fact, both of these Cabernet Francs are from 1997. So I think for that reason. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, we got some of those old vines for our Bordeaux blends, and we also got the Cabernet Franc from the very first year, 2010.
Wow.
And from the very start, it's kind of impressed me, kind of just based on its character and how it fits into our blend.
Cool.
So Cabernet Franc can really range from kind of lighter fruits. It's known for having a lot of red fruits and dark red fruits, but also I think in this case I get a lot more dark fruits often.
Yeah, I was just gonna say like the initial smell it is that sort of mix of like dark berry fruits, almost like the blackberry, mulberry,
Absolutely.
black raspberry. There's also like the whenever I think of Cabernet Franc, I think of fragrance. It's both I think sometimes a floral thing or like a potpourri thing, but also it can be herbs and sort of some others. And this has it's like a little bit of violet or some sort of rose petal kind of potpourri thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which makes it really just really pretty and intriguing.
I think violets are part of the mix. And then always people think of Cabernet Franc as peppery or herbal. And that's one of the things I think that varies a lot between different sites. And you want it. Otherwise, what's Cabernet Franc about it? And you have it here, but it's definitely blended in with all these big fruit flavors and dark fruit flavors and floral notes.
Well, I think it's hard. I think a lot of people talk about Cabernet Franc and might have a particular opinion about it, maybe because they've had a version that is really peppery or really green or really driven by those green herbal notes, and they might not like that. But I do think it's important because I think when it comes to managing your vineyard and your crop, how you're managing canopies, how much sun gets in, how you can ripen these grapes, can really affect the level of greenness. And so I always encourage Cab Franc is one of my favorite grapes. I always encourage people if they've had a bad experience with it to keep trying new Cab Francs.
Absolutely.
And I think, and especially this, like you said, there is a green note there, but it doesn't taste underripe. It doesn't appear as sort of a stemmy kind of green. It's more of this really sweet herbal kind of note.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is viticulture, like you said, and also our choices of when to pick it, and that's always that's trickier with Cabernet Franc. I think sometimes for us than any other variety. And as the fruit ripens, you get more fruit notes, and you get less of the herbs and less acid over time. And you're trying to pinpoint that to where you get that balance of still having the Cabernet Franc character, but that being ripe enough to where it's not off-putting or where the tannins aren't green. And I think that's what we go for here.
Another thing I like about this is mineral too. Like I think especially it's hard to get that rocky, gravelly, sort of stony mineral note in a lot of New World wines or a lot of Washington wines. But somehow I think you managed to find vines and managed to find these plots that really give that. Because this does have kind of like this rockiness to it. And that reminds me of that sort of Loire Valley Cab Franc minerality, which can be pretty rocky sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's also really
really interesting in that sense.
Well, let's taste the shampoo and sort of compare and contrast and see how different it is from this guy.
Sounds good. Now, shampoo we didn't get from the very beginning. The first couple of years, we were concentrated on the Bacchus and the Dionysus vineyards, and in 2012, we got a couple things. One was we got the old vines at Boucher, Merlot, that is part of the lion's share of the Valerie blend, right? And when I started going through that blend, I'm like, this one's Cabernet Franc. And so we had just a little bit of this Cabernet Franc, and it just made this great ripening blend. And so that's what we got it for. We didn't get very much those first couple years, and just was a great blend. In 2015, we were able to secure more of it. And I'm like, well, I like it. Let's get more. And so we got it in the cellar, and we thought, well, we can make more Valerie. It can go other places. But almost immediately, it just set itself apart as being just really interesting. So, Shampoo Vineyard is down in the Horseheaven Hills. It's about 5 miles off the Columbia River. Again, a legacy vineyard in Washington, planted in the early 70s by Paul Shampoo. It's gone through some ownership changes, but it's still the roster of wineries making wine there is just at the top of the Washington wine scene. So we're really fortunate to get this fruit and make just 100% Cabernet Franc. We've done it since 2015, and it's been one of our most well-received wines. I think it's just a singular wine in the state.
Yeah, I think people get really excited about this wine too, just because there isn't a lot of full varietal Cabernet Franc in the state, so it sets itself apart that way. But also, it is such a unique vineyard. I always talk about when I was a harvest intern here in 2017. it was one of my favorite fruits to receive, just because even when you grab a cluster and bite a couple grapes, or even just smell it, it smells like this. Like it's just really consistent all the way through the process. So let's smell this. I mean, right away it's funny. I've heard people talk about Cabernet Franc as when they recognize it in blind tastings or when they're tasting it, they look for the 3 Ps, which is pomegranates, peppers, and potting soil. Which is, I mean, it can be on either side of all those things. But I do think, to me, this does have a little more of that peppers. But it's not I don't like saying green bell pepper when people describe it, because that, to me, again, sort of denotes underripeness. And that's not at all. It's almost more of this like roasted pepper, or like roasted jalapeno or chili flake. It's almost like the same kind of elevated sort of aroma you get from capsicum, from any sort of peppery smell, is kind of that similar lift in the aromas.
Yeah, or sometimes we talk about it like fresh tobacco leaf.
Yeah.
Where there's this green note, but it's savory. And this definitely has savory on the palate.
Tobacco is so great. I mean, it's almost like a humidor kind of aroma. And again, it also plays into the fragrance too. Like, I don't think this doesn't have as much as the floral side of the fragrance. It's kind of like a mix of spices. There's almost like a medicinal spice in there too, which I can't quite pin down yet. Whether it's like a echinacea or something, where there's something. I don't like using the word exotic, but it's different. It's something that's just like, it's not just your run of the mill herbs and spices. There's something
it's interesting. There's not a lot of overt fruit here. There's pomegranate. It's more on the red fruit spectrum, which we would think of in a lot of Loire Valley Cabernet Franc. But it separates itself on the palate, and that's what makes it stand on its own. Is its completeness on the palate, the richness, the finish. It's a complete and complex wine.
I was just gonna say that was actually the first taste I had, and you're right. Like, the palate presence, the roundness, the richness of it is what's, I think, sets it apart. Because when I think of Loire Valley Cabernet Franc, there's a few exceptions, a few producers in very specific vineyards, but like for the most part, they're medium-bodied wines. They're usually driven by acid, maybe some elevated tannin sometimes, but they're known to be fresh wines. I mean, a lot of wines from Saumur and other parts are like Paris bistro wines. They're meant to be super quaffable, just refreshing and delightful. Whereas this actually has the richness and this presence to really stand on its own. I mean, it's such a balanced wine, because I think that sometimes I miss having a little fuller body presence in Cab Franc.
Yeah, I think like a lot of varieties in different areas, you can make delicious versions of it in a lot of areas, but you can only make special, I think, standalone Cab Franc in very few places. And I think we're lucky to have found one here.
Do you think part of that ripeness or part of the richness is directly, related to the climate down there in Horse Heaven Hills? Like, is it a matter of ripeness, of just heat units, or do you think it's sort of a combination of all types of vineyard management and vintage? I mean, obviously is a big deal, but
I think it is a lot of that. And at the end, I think there's a bit of mystery, really. You can't put your finger on why, but you can put your finger on that it is special. But the management team there, Dan, Nicholas, and the team, they're great. The yields are usually kept exceedingly low, well under 3 tons an acre, so you really get that concentration. And it often gets the most hang time. It's one of the last things we pick every year.
Cool.
And so that long hang time, I think, lets it develop this complexity.
So I want to ask you a quick tangent, because you mentioned yields, and a lot of people I hear mention yields are like, oh, really low yielding fruit, or this vineyard is great because it has low yields. What does that actually mean? Because I think for a lot of people that taste wine, maybe it's like, well, you get less yields, like there's less grapes, there's less wine, like, don't you want more wine? Like, why is that sort of a marker of quality for a lot of the vineyards you work with?
Yeah, well, I think yields are important, and there's always a discussion, and some people believe more than others, like how much it matters. But basically, I think the idea is about balance. You could have too low of yields, just like you can have too high of yields. But it has to be matched to the place and the season, which of course you don't always know from the beginning. But the idea is, if a plant has a certain amount of leaves and fruit, it has a certain amount of energy, roots, all the nutrients, it has a certain amount. And if that's going into less grapes, it's going to get more flavor and more just concentration, everything into that. I think usually also low yields is akin, sometimes it's akin to lower amounts of clusters, but also often I think it's just smaller berries. So you might have the same amount of clusters but lower yields. You're like, why is that?
Not as much juice,
It's just,
basically.
yeah, you have more skins, all the flavors, the structure, that's all in the skins. And the juice is more or less the vehicle for that. So your higher skin to juice ratio will give you more concentration.
And Cab Franc has relatively high vigor, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the more vigorous varieties out there. So it is something that you do have to be careful, because it'll just produce and produce and produce.
Yeah, definitely farming and how the grower manages that is key.
Cool. Well, this is delicious. I'm excited to taste the finished version here.
Yeah, let's taste some 18s, and then we'll talk about the role of Cabernet Franc in these wines.
Awesome. All right, so now that we have our barrel samples tasted, those were the 2019 vintage too, so it's going to be slightly different than the 18s we're about to taste. Let's taste through these wines. This first one is the 2018 Shampoo Vineyard Cabernet Franc from Horsehead Hills.
Yeah, so this is, obviously it was bottled in June, so it spent an extra six months in barrel and then was bottled in June. So now the flavors are developing a lot more. We also have two different vintages. 2018 was just one of those classic Washington vintages. Yields were low. And just the weather kind of went perfect through it, and it turned out to be a very special vintage. You see the color is very dark for Cabernet Franc here.
Yeah, I'm always very confused by color, and this is just full disclosure. Color, red wine color comes from the skins. It comes from anthocyanins and other compounds, phenol compounds in the grape skins, but it can be affected by a lot of things. Color can be affected by literally the concentration of those anthocyanins and how much are actually in the grapes, which can be affected by sunlight. So are the grapes getting a lot of sunlight to produce more? But also things like sulfur additions can bleach color a little bit depending on what stages it's in.
Yeah, and just fermentation decisions.
Exactly.
Everything that goes on with that. Length of maceration on the skins, temperature, and just we have all these variables. Yeah. And just how many color compounds are in the skins to start with. And with Cabernet Franc, that can vary from site to site.
Right. In general, though, Cabernet Franc is usually a thinner skinned, lighter colored grape than, say, Cabernet Sauvignon or some of the other sort of Bordeaux varieties with bigger grapes. Well, this is delicious.
Yeah, that's most years. This is 2018.
Wow. And you were saying 2018 as a vintage was pretty classic for Washington. You said low yields, but like as far as weather, temperature, what are we talking?
So 2018 was just a stellar year from start to finish. One of those where you just have your fingers crossed the whole time that it stays like that, and then it really did. So we had our usual warm, hot summer, and then as we went into the fall, just in early September, instead of being in the mid to high 80s, got into the high 70s, low 80s, with cooler nights to preserve that acidity, and still clear skies. And then that was just held for 3 weeks, and then in the middle of October, it just goes down another step, and so the later ripening varieties like Shampoo Cabernet Franc can hang there in nice weather with highs in the low to mid 70s and lows in the high 40s, and just kind of develop flavors, and you're not worried about a lot of rain events or overripeness. Yeah, and it was just kind of one of those picture perfect vintages.
Cool. So that's great. 2018, just awesome vintage. Tell me a little bit more about this wine as far as what you did with it in aging and fermentation. Does it see oak? Sort of, how did you approach this from a winemaking stance?
Yeah, we've been kind of experimenting with it, and in fact, in 2018, we got these concrete cubes that we've fermented in, and since then we've really added to that. 2018 was the first year we did that, and some of this was actually
cool.
fermented in concrete. The rest in stainless steel. And as far as oak, we do like a little bit of new oak in there. It gives it some richness, gives it some more complexity, but not too much. So what we found is about 20-25%. This year is about 20% new oak. And really kind of carefully chosen. We have different barrels that show more, cocoa notes and kind of thing. And this is more a barrel that lifts the body, kind of has a real nice texture to it.
And I think that's nice, and it's important. I think it's important to recognize that oak can work with Cab Franc. I think particularly when there's already a little bit of weight there, when it has a little richness in size. Whereas I get a little nervous sometimes when there's super nervy, really like tannic, acidic, green kind of Cab Franc, and then people throw new oak on it, and sometimes that can just like.
Yeah, a new barrel can really take over
totally.
a wine that doesn't have a lot of body, but this definitely
has it.
Can happen. Yeah.
Cool.
And I think it's drinking really nice right now, but it certainly will benefit from years in the cellar.
Oh, for sure. Awesome.
So we try the Gravura?
Let's do it.
All right.
So now we have our 2018 Gravura. And the shampoo Cab Franc is one of the newer members of the team, but Gravura has been around since the beginning, since 2010, the very first vintage. And it's really fun. So now we basically get to see Cabernet Franc, on its own as a full varietal expression. And this is how we see Cabernet Franc blended and sort of how it plays with the other main grapes of the Bordeaux region, Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. So tell me a little bit first about just Gravura, about the history of this wine, because it's now been around for almost a decade.
For coming up on a decade. So when we first started Avennia, the main idea was to make the top-end Bordeaux blend. I think that's what Washington can really excel at. Some of our great wines of our state are Bordeaux blends. And so I wanted to do that in a way that represented our style. Lots of older vines, cooler sites. And the idea with that, we kind of took the example of Bordeaux, where every year they make their Grand Ban, their big wine. And then they could be very selective because they're only choosing the very best stuff and the best combination to be in that top wine. And then you have another wine that's more affordable and can still be really good. It's still a house style. It's still some fruit from the same areas. It's just put together a different way. And so that was our vision of Gravura from the beginning.
And the name Gravura too, because I'm familiar with the sort of link to the Grave region, because the Grave region is a part of Bordeaux that's sort of known for these style blends, and maybe sort of harkens on the gravelly sort of mineral presence of those blends. But what's the Gravure Rodo thing?
Well, I think originally we just wanted to have a blend that had a memorable name and did reflect the Grave region. And rotogravure is it's a printing press method. Cool. It's kind of this artisanal printing press method. So we just kind of played on that rotogravure. So we just kind of stylized it to Gravura and made it our own.
It's fun. I have conversations all the time with people that are just blown away with our namings because it's taken from art and literature and history and music and all the things. So it's fun just to hear.
Yeah, we like to mix it up so it's not just one gimmick of, it's all my pet animals I've ever had.
So we have Gravura, which is, like he said, basically our second wine, or this second tier Bordeaux-style blend. The 2018 version, so it's basically every year it's been a blend of Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Cabernet Franc, which is pretty common for those types of blends, I'd say. But what do you see as sort of what Cabernet Franc does in the blend, in this wine?
Well, I think it can be hard to put your finger on sometimes. But in the blending trials, we're constantly looking at different combinations of fruit from different blocks and different amounts of Cabernet and Merlot, and at the end you can try just a Merlot Cabernet Sauvignon, and then if you put 3 or 5 or 7% or 10% Cab Franc in, as you add it, it's kind of like salting food. If you salt it right, it just makes the food taste better. With too much, it tastes like salt, and without enough, maybe it's bland. And it brings out the aromatics, and it brings out Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot too. So I think it just kind of ties that blend together. It's different amounts each year that do that. I think what's exciting changes in the Gravura in the last couple of years that I think really comes to the fore here is that it used to be just like we never had a place for wines to go. If they didn't make it into Sistina, they mostly went into Gravura. But now we have the Lydian Cabernet, and we have the wines that we're making for restaurants and such. And so this is truly a second wine. And after we make the Sistina, we still have access to everything. We have a lot more choices to really dial in this blend with every bit of detail that we have. And Sestina or Valerie.
Yeah.
With this wider palette, and we can be more selective. And so I just think this wine's really getting better every year quickly because of that option. And then we have the 2018 vintage too.
Yeah,
So
well, I totally agree. I think over the last couple of years too, I've seen it just getting stronger and stronger. Not necessarily stronger as far as its makeup, but like it's just a really complex wine. Like I think a lot of people, you know, you're right. The whole idea of a second wine isn't that it's the value wine, because in Bordeaux, a lot of these chateaux make their Grand Vin their second wine, and then they still declassify a lot of grapes into a generic Bordeaux AOP wine, or sort of some other projects like we do with some other projects we're doing. So this is still top-notch quality. I mean, it's really quality fruit, really, really great grapes. We're still putting some beautiful oak barrels in here too. Like we're treating the wine still as a really delicious quality wine.
yeah, and all of the grapes are brought in and treated the same. I mean, everything's brought in to go into as if it were maybe going into the high-end wines. It's not. It's all native yeast fermentation. It's unfined, unfiltered. It still gets all. We only buy the best barrels we can find. So it's you know, we don't cut any corners. It's just it's now become, instead of just like the other wine, it's a different expression. And so now we can really concentrate on really what Grave means, which is this balance of Cabernet and Merlot and just a little bit of Cab Franc for balance. And I think this year, you get some of that gravel of gravel graphite, which I really like. I think it comes across with great Bordeaux-style notes.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that more too, and also the fruit. I'm really impressed. There's definitely more, a lot more fruit going on, but I think a darker core of fruit, and maybe that's more of the Cabernet Sauvignon coming in, or could be just the vintage, or even these Merlot blocks. But there is a lot more sort of purple and black fruits to me in this wine.
Yeah, it is the subtle changing of fruit sources over the years, but a lot of them that we've had all along. And you know, besides the Cabernet Franc being planted in 1997, like we talked about earlier, all of the Cabernet and Merlot is planted in 1990 and before. So it still holds to our tenet and our philosophy that older vines just create these interesting wines.
Right. They're naturally low yielding.
They're naturally low yielding. They're naturally later picking, and for us, they just give a complexity that we like. This old world mixed with new world,
and consistency too, because they're usually
the yields kind of tend to.
The roots are a lot deeper, so they're more. They have more stable water sources, and they I'm just always impressed with all the wines, but this wine I think really honestly gets better and better every single vintage. Yeah, it's really phenomenal. And I think perfect for this season too, as it starts to get colder. These this wine definitely has this warmer, sort of richer presence, but at the same time still has that mineral tinge. There's still sort of like the little sort of herbal green, sort of tobacco-y mint kind of thing. Like it's the pleasant side of green.
Yes. And that's partly from the Cabernet Franc, and we get that a lot. Like, oh, I smell. How do you get that in 8% or 9% Cabernet Franc? But it's also these old vine Cabernet vines, because Cabernet should have a little bit of that too.
And part of that is because Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon are related, and Merlot. And that's one. It was amazing to just sort of learn more about Cabernet Franc as a grape, because it's sort of a parent grape to both Cabernet Sauvignon. When you take Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc, they beget Cabernet Sauvignon, but it's also a parent grape to Merlot. It's a parent grape to Carmenere. So all these Bordeaux grapes that have that sort of like green herbal tinge, one of the reasons is because they're actually all related. They're all genetically linked. So, and even Malbec, I learned, is a stepsister or stepbrother of Merlot. They have a similar parent, which isn't Cab Franc, but so it makes sense that they all work well together.
They work great in a blend, and if you find the right spot, great on their own. Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome, Chris. Thanks so much for tasting these. I always love tasting barrel samples too, to try to get into the nitty gritty about what makes things really unique and different here. And I just hope that all of you have a chance to enjoy these wines. We really still appreciate all you've done for us throughout this year. It's been another challenging time just to get through distance and through wanting to be together. But we hope this is a way that you can enjoy these wines with us, learn a little bit more about them.
And we'll try. We're going to have a great event around the release too. So we hope you enjoy this video, and then hopefully we'll see you soon
Yeah.
at our event.
Oh, on the other side.
Yes.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.